Let me go ahead and get started. We're online, so none of you have to take your seat. That's normally the first thing you say in these things, but luckily we don't have to. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Kenny Cluett, and I lead Ashoka's Global Migration Initiative, which we call Hello Europe in Europe. And we're very, very excited to moderate this session today. Before an introduction on the topic, let me give you just a few quick details. First, we'll be collecting questions in the chat, and you'll see on your right-hand side on the column, within the chat pane, there's two different buttons. One says event and one says session. Make sure part to ask your questions, so that, because that's just for this session, otherwise you'll be asked them to the entire group and it'll be harder to figure out. But as we speak, please put questions into that, and the last 15 minutes of our session will take some of those questions from the public. You'll see Clara, who just posted a message there. She's going to be collecting the questions and bringing those, kind of moderating that so that it's a little just more organized, because online stuff is difficult to do, and she'll bring those to the session. A couple other things. One thing, this session is being recorded. The only faces and voices being recorded are those that are in the pane, so none of your comments or anything like that is going to be recorded or shared. But the people that are speaking, that will be shared on our website shortly after the event. And then just one other big thing, the purpose here is inspiration. It's to learn and to provide engagement opportunities. That's what we're hoping to with this day. So as you listen to these things, there's kind of three things to do about it. One, be inspired. Take the ideas home, take what you're learning, share it. One person was sharing yesterday that he's using these videos as a homeschooling tool for his kids. You know, share this stuff wherever you can. Secondly, learn more about the problems, learn more about the solutions. And thirdly, engage with these fellows, with the people that are speaking, with their initiatives, and with Ashoka. This session will last for 1 hour, and right at 12, we'll release you and give you 15 minutes before the next session begins. I'd encourage you to visit the expo at that point and find some of the fellows that have been talking if you're interested, and you can connect with them, you can commit to support, you can do other things, and then continue connected with Ashoka and Changemakers United. We're gonna have a number of other things after this. So that's just a broad picture. Now, let me introduce the session briefly. So the COVID-19 pandemic has undeniably caused damage to most people in social, economic, health dimensions. And as is usual in crisis of this dimension, the effects only increase for groups and communities in vulnerable positions. FAO recently reported that these communities face what they call a crisis within a crisis. And this is true for many of the vulnerable groups. And it's in addition to the shared strain in their economy, their potential health, fear and uncertainty. Sometimes there's very specific challenges that people face. And just to give you a few examples, migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees camped in warehouse settings are unable to create healthy distances from each other. The homeless, and many who have become homeless in these days, don't have a home to be confined to. Many migrant and minority entrepreneurs, such as Roma all across Europe, that live on a day-to-day basis are not able to leave their home to search for work and income. And many don't have the correct paperwork or ability to fill out the forms to get public assistance. Women who suffer domestic abuse are now stuck in their homes with partners on edge without a place to go. And in many cases, with the typical judiciary systems and resources frozen or difficult to access. And many other issues. One of the other issues is children with access to education that's been cut off for many, and especially those that are most vulnerable. These are just some examples of the effects so far. And most, if not all, predictions about the near future cast a dreary portrait as well, which becomes disastrous for those already in vulnerable positions. So you may be saying, thank you, Kenny, for this great news. We already knew all the bad things. And I know the portrait is dreary indeed, but there is good news. Now more than ever, social entrepreneurs who are created systemic change are necessary and are active. These are people that don't conform only to the immediate solutions, food for today and hunger for tomorrow, as we say in my country, but rather they seek to discover the roots of problems and to change the entire system that's at play. Today we have three amazing social entrepreneurs from our Ashoka Fellow Network that are working on some of the core issues surrounding the most vulnerable, especially focusing on refugees, on women suffering violence, and on children in vulnerable positions. So what I propose, I'm going to introduce them very briefly, I'll just give an introduction on what their organizations are, and then we'll spend some time asking them more specific questions about their initiatives, their solutions, and what they see for the future and for the present. So first person I'll introduce is Gemma Sunier, who you see in the screen. She's from the Ana Bella Foundation. Ana Bella, the founder, is an Ashoka Fellow who wasn't able to be here today for personal reasons. But we're really, really glad to have Gemma. The Ana Bella Foundation is shifting the focus of media and support programs that address gender-related violence towards seeing women as survivors instead of victims. They changed the paradigm from helping women who have suffered, they changed the paradigm to help women who have suffered violence to avoid social exclusion by leveraging their strengths and capabilities to empower them as survivors rather than victims and effective contributors toward a world that needs them. We'll hear a little bit more about how they've had to adapt programs and focuses and even media calls to the media and others because of the COVID pandemic. Gemma, it's great to have you here. And in a second, I'll ask you some more questions. The second person we have on screen here is Jeremy Lashan from Bibliotech Sans Frontières. I hope I did that in the closest thing to a French accent that I can. He's an Ashoka Fellow based in France. And what they do is they work to recover the full sense of citizenship to people in vulnerable positions. They do this through community hubs, vehicles of information, and education and culture for those on the margins. Library Without Borders works in 30 countries, as far as I know. There may be more since the last time we spoke, because they're constantly reaching new places and new groups. And one of their main focus groups are asylum seekers and refugees, as well in impoverished neighborhoods. And again, we'll hear from Jeremy Shun about their response to COVID, of seeing a strong need for tutoring and remote monitoring for children, how they work that out, and how they're working a number of other things out in some of the most difficult places around the world. And finally, Massimo Valati is here from Calcio Sociale, and Natalia Pan is here as well. I think we had a few connection problems, but she'll be in the room in a second. Also the program director from Calcio Sociale. And this organization uses football or soccer as a tool to develop changemaker skills in youth and adults, and change the rules around this in the process, empowering marginalized and impoverished communities in the suburbs of large cities in Italy, such as Rome. And again, one of the most interesting questions we will ask Massimo is, how do you digitalize soccer? And obviously the response is going to be a little more complex than that, but they've been doing some very interesting work, carrying the work on values and changing the ruls for impoverished communities, bringing it to their homes through digital tools. So with that, I will, let me ask a first question. I'll go one by one, kind of in the same order that we had. We just lost Massimo and Natalia again, but they'll be back. We're working on this in the back end. First question, and I'll ask Gemma, then Jeremy, and then Massimo and Natalia. Two things. How has this crisis affected the group that you work with, or the groups that you work with? You know, very briefly, what are some of the special effects? We all know there's economic, there's health effects. What are some of the special effects? How will it continue to affect them? And then the second question is, what are you doing about it? And describe a bit of how you faced it. So what is the main, how has this crisis affected your group in particular? And what are some of the effects you see even going forward? And secondly, what are you doing about it? Let's go ahead and start with Gemma. Here, let me unmute you. You should be able to speak. Hold on. I can't hear you yet.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Yes. Thank you very much for this space. We work on a topic that is actually affecting 1.3 million women in the world, which is also a global pandemic. So we on a global pandemic, and one of the struggles is that many of these women remain invisible because 80% of them don't reach out for help. And what is happening during COVID-19 is that it's adding an extra layer of this invisibility, because it's even harder to get to them, to the victims, because they are 24 hours confined with their abusers. the restrictions are very hard and the situation is critical and it's driving them to the edge. We have also seen, we have experienced an increase of calls and demands for help. So it is also pushing in another direction, that women are breaking the silence, but it is really hard to actually get to them. So we have found a solution, a vaccine to this pandemic, that is through victims of gender-based violence. We reach out to them, and we are able to access the 80% that normally are silenced. So that we create hubs in local areas where we can access the 80% of women that remain invisible. So, for example, we have launched campaigns, like you were saying, where like social media campaigns that we say, do not stay at home. Like the global message is stay at home. And we are sending a message from survivors saying, reach out to us. You're not alone. Don't stay at home. So this is one of the ways that we have been reaching out to them. So we are creating local hubs locally so that we can have this help in place for them once they decide to break the silence. Once they see that they're not alone, they need to be accompanied throughout this process. And having someone that has gone through this process helps them to get empowered and think that they can do it, because one of the big barriers is social stigma. So the positive example of survivors is removing that social stigma.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Diema. That's one of the living in Spain, we're a little closer to Ana Bella Foundation, and one of the kind of most shocking things that you guys have done is that hashtag don't stay at home. And of course, at the beginning, you're wondering if it's a right-wing xenophobic party kind of hashtag or something. So you jump in and realize, I think one of the things you've brought to the general attention is this situation has gotten a lot worse for a lot of people. And at the same time, like you said, providing examples of people that have gone through the cycle to be able to reach out to. So thank you so much. Let me move on, and then we're going to come back and ask you some further questions about that. Jeremy, let me turn to you. With the groups that you're working with, and I think in particular the refugee groups, but feel free to speak about more. What are some of the major issues that you're facing, and what are you guys doing about it?
Thank you, Kenny, and hi everybody. The thing which is quite strange for me during this crisis is usually, we work with what we call vulnerable population, but we can be vulnerable for many different reasons towards education, knowledge, information, considering your social position, your country, the fact that you are a refugee or not, etc. So there can be like lots of different situations. But maybe for the first time in history, we as human beings are confronted to the same crisis, right? And I heard an historian about that saying that even during World War II, World War II was not like a global event, even if it was at the world scale. It was still something which was like during a certain amount of time and not the equivalent for everybody on Earth. I think that for the first time in history, we are like confronted to the same crisis. And this crisis has big effects, of course, on health, but also on how we share information and how we are vulnerable toward this, fake news, rumor, misinformation. I heard this morning that the president from Madagascar has found like the remedy against the virus, which is like a kind of local plant in Madagascar. So all of this is, drive us like collectively totally crazy. And now we are like vulnerable toward this kind of misinformation. And tomorrow we will need more education to build more resilient society for the future. So I think that this crisis reminds us at Libraries Without Borders how our mandate and what we do as a daily basis and is crucial in this kind of time of crisis, but also to rebuild tomorrow. So very quickly after the lockdown in France, we launched. We were thinking about how can we convert our action in digital. So we launched Facebook Live for parents to continue the teaching of their children. But we were like, and we did like once, like each day we had like a Facebook Live and some conference during the afternoon. So it was like a big, mobilization of all the team for that. But we were like knowing that through this Facebook Live and these advices from teachers, etc., we are just like tackling a part of the issue, and we're like most of our common beneficiaries or users for projects don't have access to the internet, or they don't know how to connect on the Facebook Live of Libraries Without Borders. So that's why we launched in parallel a project of tutorate, remote tutorate for children refugees in France, and we are delivering more than 25,000 hours of remote tutoring through volunteers who are teachers, and we call the children every day. And the thing which is very interesting, and we can come back to that later, is that now we are like coming back to school in France since last week, but most of these children haven't come back to school. Most of vulnerable group in France, if you take like not only refugees, but the poorest areas in the north neighborhoods of Marseille, for example, 3% of the children have come back to schools because parents are afraid of putting them back to school. So you see the huge gap in terms of education, in terms of information, and it's our mandate, or it's our role to be part of the solution, even if the solution is a civic, I would say, like and needs a civic mobilization. So we can just be at our humble level a little part of this solution, and we need the mobilization of everybody on that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. That's encouraging and sobering as well. I think one thing you said is something I've also noticed in the pandemic. Even though a lot of the fake news items are scapegoating and blaming refugees and refugee communities and Roma and others for not obeying the laws and the lockdown and being careless, they're actually the most careful and the most fearful group often that are obeying the law the most. And for that reason, there needs to be almost extra care, which is something I think you guys are very close to the ground with. So I may come back to that in a second, but thank you so much. I'm really encouraged by the response. Let me move on to Natalia, who's finally connected. Sorry, Natalia. So Natalia works with Massimo in Calcio Sociale, and I'd love to ask you kind of the same question that I've asked to Gemma and to Jeremy. What are some of the main issues facing the populations you work with? And what are you doing about it? How are you solving some of that?
Okay, thank you for this question. Our organization works in a suburb of Rome, in Corviale, and this crisis has highlighted even more the fragility of the lockdown was difficult for everyone, but imagine living in the condition for our youngest people, in which some of the young people have no parents with them because they are in jail. Some others live in very small houses and they have no place to play. They have no balcony where to go out and breathe fresh air just for a couple of minutes per day. And some of them have families with no money to buy something to eat. The result of this situation is that domestic violence increasing a lot in this period, and some cases unfortunately ended with suicide. So for us, this is the reason because we can't stay immobile in this moment, even if our activities are stopped. And this is the reason because we decided to digitalize our activities and transforming a physical way of interacting into an online experience. And because we understand that at the moment it's important for us to reorganize the activities and continue to give support to our youngest people. So at the moment, we in our country, but I think is in all Europe, the after the health emergency, must face the social emergency. So the biggest problem is that with the end of lockdown now, most of our youngest people started to spending their days outside in the neighborhood with no control. And for us, this is a paradox, because during the lockdown, the problem is that our youngest people stay in complete isolation. And now the problem is that with the school closed, they stay all day in the street. And in a periphery, as in a suburb like Corviale, this is very dangerous because kids are exposed to no positive lifestyle example, like crimes and drugs. So now we decided to reorganize again our activities and continue the educational path started in this year with our kids. And we decided to combine the face-to-face and online activities, even if right now team sports are still not in Italy. So we start weekly meeting with our kids and teenagers, and we involved them with the quizzes, challenge, and always to continue the educational purpose. And we are trying to stay with them and to support them, not only also to psychological support and help them and their families.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And I'm going to ask you a little more detail later. But again, these insights are so deep for a lot of us who don't live in the situations, how actually fresh air and being out in the open and being able to get out seem to be the solution, but actually it creates a lot of other problems when the other structures aren't in place and how you're pivoting again. So I'm going to come back to that later and ask you about the second pivot, because you pivoted first to online, then to this other stuff.
Yeah.
But let me move on. I'm going to do another round, and
I can hear you.
Sorry, I meant to mute someone else and I muted myself. What I was saying is this isn't the typical panel where we're able to interact a lot, but we'll try to do some of that. Let me just go one by one and some more specific questions to get into detail. Gemma, let me start with you and unmute you rather than muting myself this time. One of the questions that's also come up a little bit is how you guys have two aspects, right? You have the public and making people aware of the situation, but also having very quick, immediate responses and ways to engage with women who do want to break the silence, I think is the term that you used. Could you tell us just a bit more about that process, and during COVID, what that looks like when a woman hears the message or finds out about it or whatever? How do they engage with you? What are some of the things that make your interaction with them unique? How do you work with them in that situation?
Right. So one of the issues that we face is that many women don't realize that they are actually being abused. So they just realize that there is something going wrong and that there is something that they want to change. So by us being an example of what that looks like, they start realizing, okay, this might be happening to me. So when they reach out, it's not crystal clear, okay, yes, I'm being abused, this is what is happening. So we start just engaging with them in a conversation and start seeing where they are and what stage of the cycle of violence they are. So we, through our experience, the people that attend those calls are survivors themselves. So through our experience, it's easier for us to empathize and use our experience to see how we can help them. Then we design a strategy depending on what stage they are and their specific situation. We need to find a solution that works for that person in particular and in her context. So we match her with another survivor who is close to her geographically, so that they can, this survivor understands very well the resources available to her locally, and has gone through all those stages herself. So so that the survivor can accompany the victim through this process of transformation. accompanied by the foundation, of course, we're always there, but it is very important that survivors are the ones driving this change as well, so that they act as change makers in their own community. So during this crisis, we have been working against the clock to like train more survivors, to just be there for everyone that is reaching out for help, because we have experienced such an increase of calls, which is really good, but it's also a challenge. But it is, you know, there is a lot of women who this become like even more isolated because of the crisis. So it's very important that we're also reaching out to them. So yeah, we have been trying to work in many different areas, like that I was telling you, but also through like more personal areas like Facebook, or that is more direct, and it's another avenue as well.
Yeah.
We work a lot on Facebook.
And it seems one of the ways to do that the most is storytelling from a first person perspective, basically, right? Most of the women, if not all, that work directly with these other with survivors or potential survivors, maybe people that are breaking the silence. It seems that you're telling stories and showing kind of where people were in their cycle of violence and how they broke out seems to be one of the main things. Is that right? And if so, also how is the rest of society reacting as well to your message, which is kind of shocking at times?
So basically, one of the challenges we face is the social stigma that is attached to violence against women. So we have decided to be the face of, say, yes, this has happened to me, it's okay, right? You can say it. So because there's so much silence around it, so we try to remove the social stigma so that we can see that despite of the experience that you had, you can also achieve great things in your life, right? So we need more people to say, I am a survivor of gender-based violence, and there, like that, we can see a social change and remove that social stigma. But yeah, I mean, you say the message is shocking, but hopefully over time, it will be just something that, you know, it's common, that, you know, another experience that you share, and that, you know, we can all be together fighting this, because there has been such a forceful response to COVID-19, but there is not a forceful response to this pandemic, that it's violence against women. So it's a little, so we hope that by removing the social stigma, there could be another united response like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gemma. That's really helpful. And I use shocking in a good way mostly, although I imagine there's a lot of different reactions, but that does seem to need to be one of the keys, right? To shock the rest of society into realizing, like you said, that there's other pandemics. And there's another pandemic that's been running on for a while that many of us have not been able to see, or not been willing to see. So thanks for bringing that to this session, and thank you for your answers. Let me move on, and then, like we said, we're collecting questions from the public as well. And by the way, after this session, right at 12, you'll have 15 minutes if you want to jump into the expo. For those that are asking questions, if something hasn't been answered or you want to ask something specific. I've seen questions saying, hey, Gemma, I want to volunteer, or whatever. Please go into their expo, or you can contact them personally as well in the People tab. So let me move on to Jeremy. Jeremy, you've been engaged in crisis situations for a long time. It seems that a lot of your life has been in different crisis situations, refugee camps and vulnerable communities in countries that have conflict going on. How is this different? You know, how is this crisis, how is what's going on now different from other things, if it is? And what makes it, you know, more complex or less complex? I'd love your view kind of as an expert in crisis situations. And
yeah, as I was saying earlier, I think this is like a global crisis, you know, and it's very different because all of us are concerned by that. So all of us might be sensitive about the fact that is, you know, some other people at the other side of the world are confronted to the same crisis. And it's not exactly the same thing when you are talking about wars in Africa, for example, because it's very hard for us to we can have empathy for sure for these people, but it's very hard for us to have like a representation of what does it mean. At the same time, the thing which is very interesting is that we when we were like at the edge of the crisis here in Europe, we were hearing a lot the fact that coronavirus, COVID-19 is a time bomb for Africa and that it will be a disaster. I'm sure that you heard that. But the reality is that for now, and we don't know, of course, and what is going to happen, but for now, the epidemic is quite well controlled in Africa. So maybe it's due to the climate or, for many factors. But the reality, and there was like a very, very interesting article in a French newspaper two weeks ago about that, is that in these countries, people are very aware of how you protect yourself from this kind of disease. And the thing which is very interesting, to give you just one single example, when we work like this kind of community hubs or libraries for street children in Burundi, for example, but anywhere on the continent, the first things that children do before entering this kind of libraries or community center is to wash their hands. And this is something that is totally natural in their daily education, because they went through Ebola, cholera crisis, all these major diseases that they have to tackle with on the continent. When you go to a library in France or a school, like children don't wash their hands naturally when they enter the library, right? And they don't have like this. So now it's changing, of course, and we tend to implement this kind of gestures. But when you go to Africa, people have this kind of habits. At the same time, there are like big concentration of population, so it's a big risk. And if we talk more precisely about refugee camps, for me, like one situation that is particularly monitored by UN agencies right now is the situation in Bangladesh, in Rohingyas refugee camps, where we are pretty much active with Libraries Without Borders, because I think it's the biggest concentration of human population in the world. So it's 1 million people in like these mega camps of Kutupalong near Cox's Bazar. So last week, this was like the first big news that the two first cases of coronavirus has been detected in the camps. So we don't know how the situation will evolve, but it can be a major issue due to the concentration of the population. So I think we need to be cautious about don't being like the how we say that, like the people who are going to announce like the big disaster and the doom about like for these people, because we know that it's underdeveloped countries and they face lots of problems their health system. So we need to be careful, because on the other side, this population has been confronted to many different epidemics, and even like if you just take like the 10 last year. So yeah, there for me there are kind of good. There are some possibilities of being optimistic about the way they can tackle the difficulties, and at the same time, the thing which is very interesting in Africa is that when they decided to lock down, or not exactly lock down because it really depends on the countries, but they closed the schools. And of course, in Europe, when they close the schools, you go, on remote learning, and you go on your computers. And we know that maybe in Europe, like 10% or 20% of the children have difficulties to connect, etc., and to follow the classes. But in Africa, like the proportion is totally inverse. So you have like 80-90% of the children that cannot follow the courses. So when you close the schools in Africa, you just like put all the children in the streets, and you stop totally the education. So this is a major challenge that has to be tackled, because this kind of epidemics, I guess, will continue in the future. So maybe this is the first wave, as we say. So we need to think about that and find a solution and support this country to find a solution to a way of what we call offline internet applied without borders, which is like basically we are not going to implement internet in all this country in like the next 5 years. So it's more like how you create buffers for population who don't have access to the internet to still get access to rich media, to quality educational content, etc.
Yeah, Jeremy, that's something that was really interesting for me when Jeremy and I were able to be in some refugee camps in Greece, trying to figure out how to work there. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about your initiative in the refugee shelters in France and elsewhere is how you're bringing technology to those places. Like you just started mentioning it a little bit, but what are some of the tools and ways for kids that don't have access at their homes or don't have enough access or enough internet? How are you bridging that gap through some practical tools? Because I imagine you have a million things going on, but just maybe a couple snapshots for us to see some of the solutions that help get to that route.
For Libraries Without Borders, technology is never an end in itself, and that's why we are very adapting, what we implement depending on the context. And here, we wanted to start very quickly, and we knew that these children, most of the time, they have like low access to the internet, or maybe just on the smartphone of their parents. They don't have like a computer, etc. So we decided to put human first and have like big bunch of volunteers, quite experimented in terms of education, so most of them teachers, etc. And to not to call like children once a week and saying how do you do, etc. But have like a call every day, half an hour to 1 hour call with the children every day, with space and one-to-one call. It's not like group. If they can do video, they do video, but most of the time it's only just calling. And now that we are like breaking down the lockdown, people are going out, so there might be some more physical contact. But at the beginning, it was just fun. And at the same time, we work with other organizations to equip these children with tablets and computers. So it's like a combination of things. But I think that the first answer for educational continuity, or whatever we call it, it's like putting human at the center, and the technology will follow anyway.
Yeah. No, that's so good, Jeremy. Thank you so much, and thanks for the analysis. And again, one of the things, someone asked a question about this in the group, and I think it's one thing I find with social entrepreneurs that are successful at reaching vulnerable groups is they switch the tables often, and know how to see the value and the change-making skills and the power in the populations that are considered vulnerable. I think one of our challenges as Ashoka and other organizations is also getting those leaders from the vulnerable groups on these calls and on stuff like that, because often we end up, although we believe that, we end up still talking about them. And I wanted to acknowledge that, because that is one of the major challenges for the sector of social innovation, without a doubt. It's becoming a very elite sector, although it's helped many people. But for our organizations as well, is how do we continue to use these amazing tools, but give more protagonism? And I know it's something all three of you work on very hard. And so I knew that bringing that to the table, and I know from Hello Europe as well, really trying to identify who are some of these leaders, and how do we bring them to the surface, has been a challenge. In my experience during this crisis, because we're using all these technological tools and having to share them, actually I'm seeing more and more representation than before, because it's easier to connect to a Zoom call sometimes than it is to go to a conference. So hopefully we'll learn something from that. But I think that is the big challenge. In some ways. Anyway, before I go off on tangent, thank you so much, Jeremy. Let me turn to Natalia. I think what Jeremy just said about the personal connection could be a great introduction to what you guys are doing. One of the, I mean, the big question was, how did you switch, from soccer to online? What was a bit of that process to figure out what are some of the main things that you do that we're missing, and how to bring that to the children? I'd love to hear a bit more about that, the pivot, right, from one thing to another.
Yeah, this is a good question. I think that to understand how we can digitalize our activities is important to explain our methodology, because we use soccer as a tool to promote empathy, teamwork, and leadership in young people. So we use soccer to transform our beneficiaries in a change maker. And this is possible because we completely rewrite the rules of football in order to promote a relationship. So to do this, we have usually before COVID-19, we have activities inside the pitch where with the different soccer rules, the team are mixed but balanced. So women, men, children, elderly people play together. And we have also activities outside the pitch. And these activities is like developing a specific area of the suburb, sharing moments with the aim of strengthening profound values. These activities contribute to gain points in the standings of our tournaments. And so we decided to start from these activities to digitalize social soccer. And we started an online academy with kids and teenagers with weekly meetings, includes that challenge games always for educational purpose to allow the young people to continue their educational path during the lockdown. The activity in the academy will be implementing during this lockdown, also to involve the families. Next to the activities, we have activities not face-to-face, but in group. Our teenager is divided into two groups. We have the activities with only kids and teenagers at the moment dedicated only to them, where they feel free to express themselves and explain our day experience. Yeah, and we also have a group in which we include only residents and families of the neighborhood. And so we start we implement a format in which our kids and teenagers will be protagonists and involving families and residents using the cultural activities. And our idea is to give voices to themselves and to the neighborhood, because now it's important to keep the light up in
and one question that we sorry, I know you've used DJs and music and as well in some of this, so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'd love to hear just a tiny bit of that, because I think that's in line with what you're saying of turning them into the protagonists and the stories, hearing those stories. But carry on. Love to hear about that as well.
Yes, we organize different type of activities, and one of these is cultural. We inviting a violinist that play for the residents. Consider that we have in Corviale, our headquarters is in front of the biggest houses building in Italy. It's 1 kilometer of apartments. Yeah, so it's like a big arena. Yeah, where the violence can play, and our children can can speak to the neighborhood, because they have in front of our headquarters they have a big arena to
so
speak.
It's literally hearing their voices. Oh, that's great.
And but yeah, we continue to use also sport as a part of our conversation during when we have this online meeting. And we're using football word, for example, for our challenge in order to involve participants. And we continue to use the positive competition between the teams. We have to stop at our tournament for this year. And we have 11 teams. So we involved 100 people this year with, in our tournament. And we decided to continue. So sometimes we have a challenge between the teams.
Thank you,
of the tournament.
Natalia. Thank you so much. And I actually have like 100 questions I want to ask each one of you to go more into detail, and I'm sure a lot of the other people do as well. In 1 second or in a minute, I want to turn over to questions from the public, but I wanted to ask all three of you something, and we'll go in order again just for the sound quality. If there's one thing, you know, one resource, one type of support, one magic wish that you'd like to have, what would it be? What would the best kind of support for people to give you right now be? Just, you know, ask for the stars, but just to give us a picture as well as how these systems changing organizations, what kind of support they need as well. Gemma, let's start with you. I can't hear you, I think.
So our challenge right now is to multiply the local support that we are providing because of the huge request of help that we are facing. So our ask is that we need, for each of these new groups to be set up, we need 10,000 euros, which would help 200 women locally. So we are working against the clock to set up this new hub. So this is the help that we really need right now, to find funding to continue to support the groups that already exist and build new ones, because there is such a huge demand.
Great. So money to build new groups. You have the volunteers, you have people ready to serve. It's more getting them connected.
Exactly. We have loads of volunteers, and we are, like you say, using Zoom and other techniques that are including people that before were refusing to use Zoom. And so we are more united than ever through Zoom with our local network, with our local, interconnecting all of our local networks, because we work worldwide in many different countries. So these technologies help us to be interconnected more than ever. But it is the local support that needs reinforcing right now, because they're reaching out for the help.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gemma. Jeremy, what about for you?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna be down to earth like Gemma, and we need funding, of course. We need funding because the time are hard, and I know that they are hard for everybody, but I can assure you that for non-profit, it will be very, very difficult in the coming months because of the economic crisis that is going to happen, because people are going to diminish their donation, because company will private funding will be lower, etc. So we need to mobilize collectively. To give you an example, the project for like 3 months of tutoring for the children is 250 euros per children for 3 months. So it's like 3 euros per day per children. And we want to continue that. Now we are serving like 300 children. We have, you know, the ability to raise this to 500 or 600 or even 1,000 children, and the needs are here. And the big question for us is how do we continue after the end of June, basically, after the end of the year, because we know that the effect of this crisis will be long-lasting, and this kind of accompaniment, and not only for refugees but also children in rural areas, will be long-lasting and will need like support for long-term. So yes, please support us.
Send the money. All right, thank you so much, Jeremy. What about for you, Natalia? There we go.
I think the same. We need funds to continue our activities, especially now, because our fundraising campaign for this year is completely go away, because many of the private and foundation give money for the health emergency. So we lost the 1 year of work, and but we need to implement now our activities, and we want to implement also the platform that we experimented in this period, because we think that with difficulties always arise important opportunities. Experiment this platform, we saw that has a great impact in our kids, And we want to use this platform to connect all social soccer experience in Europe and Italy. Important connect our network and give voices to other kids and teenagers. So we need to
Great, thank you so much.
activities.
I'm not surprised. I work with organizations that work with migrants and refugees as well, and often those organizations have increased like expenditures and immediate needs in situations like this because they're kind of first response. So that's not surprising, and that's one of the major things. Again, for any of you who are like, oh wow, I have $1 million in the bank that I want to transfer right now, that you can do that. You can connect to them, to these different entrepreneurs in the expo, and offer that kind of support or others as well. Let's go to a few questions from the public. There's kind of a double question that's been asked, and it has to do with how easy it is. On the one hand, how easy has it been to engage with volunteers and others for this very intense, one-on-one calls? In the case of Jeremy, well, all of you really do a lot of one-on-one calls and connections and stuff. And also, how are your beneficiaries or the people you're reaching out to or the people you work with, how are they responding? Has it been easy to get them to participate, etc.? So this is to all three of you. If anyone wants to respond, here, I'll unmute all of you and whoever talks first, we'll get.
Maybe I can answer you, because there on this tutorial project for refugees, there were 2 times. When we started with the lockdown, we immediately reached the organization with host these refugees, so in shelters or whatever. And the first thing they told us, and for the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, the priority was for access to food, basically, and very basic needs, right? And education of the children was not a priority at all. But once these needs had been covered, people were very eager to, give this chance and this opportunity to their children. So they are, like, parents are very helpful. They give their smartphone, things that they don't do during the day. They give their smartphone to their children for doing like the tutorial session. And the thing which is very important for refugees in Europe is that they know that children are often like the best connection they have, and the best chance, actually, are best accelerators they have for integration. Because children learn the language much more quickly than the parents, because they are in schools, etc. So most of the time, like, children are the best connection with the host country. So that's why it's very important for us as host country to invest on children. And the parents, most of them, they really understand that this opportunity they have. It's not a good way of talking about children, of course, but this chance they have that their children might be like the future of their integration.
Yeah, that's great. Gemma or Natalia, do you want to add to that? Here, I'll unmute.
For us, in terms of volunteering, it's actually been, our volunteer network is worldwide. So it's always challenging to manage it when you are based in one country. So it's this situation has provided an openness for people to actually be willing to use telematic tools to be connected. So it has had a positive impact in that way, that we have been able to talk to women that was only possible to do through normal telephone, whereas now everybody's like open to use those tools, and it has enabled us to be in calls with hundreds of our volunteers at the same time, and just chatting and checking how we are and how we're doing, something that is very necessary with the field of work that we work on, because it enables us to share the struggles and what we're doing, and be more united in that way. And in terms of the beneficiaries, which also includes the volunteers as well, we already have been working online through a Facebook private group that has 22,000 women survivors. And this group has grown, and we have seen even more interactions there. And there we have beneficiaries and survivors. And it's just meant that there's more online activity, which in a way, it's good to unite people, but it's obviously not enough, because you need to have, in our field of work, we need to have this human contact as well to be able to accompany to the resources. So luckily in Spain, this kind of accompaniment has been described and considered as essential. So we have been able to continue to do that with the measures in place, with the masks and all the, but it's been really, really hard to actually get to the home of the women who are confined. That has been really challenging.
Yeah. Thank you, Gemma. Natalia, I think you wanted to say something quickly. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with Jeremy when speak about the importance to involve the kids and the children and to give them possibility to grow and to spread to speak. And we in this period we saw that with the online tools we can give voices to more children and teenagers, and they react very well to our activities, because for them is a moment to escape from their problem and from this stressed situation. We speak with our network in Europe, and they have the same problem. They need something to connect with other children, with other kids, and so we want to implement this.
Cool. So we have 4 more minutes left, but I wanted to ask a question going forward, because all the countries that we're in, I think we have France, Spain, and Italy here, are hopefully successfully exiting the lockdown pandemic phase, right? We all have questions about what that'll look like or whatever, but some of the problems that you've spoken about have been more uncovered by the pandemic rather than created, right? People living in warehouse situations is not something that happened during the pandemic. It was before. Now it's become worse. Poverty, children not having voices in vulnerable situations, women suffering domestic abuse and feeling invisible, so invisible that they can't speak out about it. Those have been uncovered by this pandemic, and we know some difficulties are coming. What for you is the 1 or 2 thing, and I'd ask you just to be really brief for the sake of time, but 1 or 2 things that you'd say, this is what we've learned from this situation, and this is what we're going to carry on doing, like something that you've learned as an organization that you're going to continue implementing into the future. And I'm going to start with Jeremy, because I'm guessing he already knows, and I like putting him on the spot whenever I can. And then I'll move to Gemma and to Natalia. But what's one thing just going forward, either a concern or something that you've learned or you've started to do that you'd like to continue to do?
Like the organization now is just like in the middle of thousands of questions and interrogations about what we do, how shall we continue, how do we need to adapt our mandate or the way we intervene to do it better. The thing which is interesting is that at a global level, basically Libraries Without Borders always intervene through partners on the field, who are like a B2B2C organization, let's say, and that means that what we do for this organization is to train them, transfer them skills, expertise, tools, content, etc. So a big part of our work is about doing missions, right, and training missions. So all of this is down for the moment, and I'm not sure about what will be the future for that. On the other side, what we observe is that this kind of format, through video calls, Zoom, etc., can be very useful and can save a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of environmental impact of our work. So it might be a good way of thinking about what can be the future. But still, the thing that moved me the most on all this question is that what we observed during this crisis is that women are on the front line. And it was about Jim I was saying earlier, you know, because we know that GBV were very hard during this crisis. But at the same time, what we observe and what we were observing in refugee camps or in vulnerable countries before, that like women are like leading, you know, the household. Most of them, they are the people who are getting cash to the house, etc. And it's true in developing country, but see what happened during lockdown in France or in Europe, like the people in the frontline jobs, the big majority, the huge majority of them are women, and this need to make to think about how we can target a little bit more project on women empowerment, and that's why I'm very pleased to share this this roundtable with Gemma and with Annabella Foundation, because I'm sure that there are lots of connection between our works and how we have more, you know, tools and content for this kind of objectives.
Well, thank you, Jeremy.
We lost you, Kenny.
Jeremy,
sorry, I did that again. I meant to mute you and I muted myself. I said we're right at the time, but I'm gonna go over just a few minutes, if that's okay with you guys, with Gemma and Natalia, to hear them answer. And just a reminder again, you'll have 15 minutes. At 12:15 is when the next session starts on the stage. So you'll have some time to visit before then. Gemma, let's hear from you. What are the, you know, what are you going to carry forward as briefly as you can?
Right. So like Jeremy, like we have learned so many online tools that help connect our network, which has been great, great opening for everyone. And we're going to continue carry on with that. But and something that we have been always saying, like there's so many women that are invisible. 80% of them don't reach out for help. The pandemic has made that visible, so we're going to carry out saying this needs to be on the forefront. Like Jeremy saying, this needs to be on the forefront of the agenda. This pandemic has made it visible in a way that how vulnerable these women are. So this needs to be carried on. It cannot be put back again in the drawer. We need to continue with that work.
Thank you, Gemma. One of the questions a few people asked that we haven't been able to address, but I would encourage you to reach out to Gemma and to others. And we won't address it now, but just to say is exactly that, like, how do we get these issues on the forefront through media, social media, etc. That's probably another session we need to organize at some point, is how we've learned to use social media. And we'll continue to do that. But that's something I think that's been central to all of you and to your work as well. But thank you so much, Gemma. Thank you for being here and taking some of these tough questions for Annabella and for the whole foundation. Natalia, what about for you? What are some things that Calcio Social is going to take forward?
Yeah, with this period, we understand as Gemma told, is the importance of the online to give voices more people, but understand that our beneficiaries, kids and teenagers, has a lot of things to tell and a lot of idea to change what they did, what they don't like in their area. And if we give the possibility to change something, they are able to do this. And we saw this during this year when we work with them, but now we saw more, because they have a resilience capacity to start and to continue their to start.
Great.
And
thank you all so much. We're
12:03.
I'm gonna release you into the expo, although you can leave at any time. But just kind of as a quick sum up, I think two big ideas or a few big ideas have come out of here that I just wanted to point out to. One is that started in the chat and has come out through the conversation, is the need for the voices of the vulnerable to be heard in the organizations, in society, and for them to feel that they're being heard as well amongst themselves. Not everyone can build an auditorium type setting around a huge living block, as is the case in around Rome, but I think that image is caught in my head, right, of kids being able to hear their voices literally and hear their stories. The importance of women in this, of mothers, of front end workers, of children, and how their work and their voices really matter, and the need for funding for organizations that work with the vulnerable to be able to do systemic work. Of course, there was an immediate need for food, for provision, for some of this stuff. Now there's a lot more long-term stuff, and one of the encouragements, of course, this is Ashoka's party line, right, constantly, but one of the encouragements we want to do is, as you think of funding, as you think of helping and volunteering, think in the long term, think of the systemic solutions, think of how to empower more change makers. Thank you all so much for being here. This was really exciting. It's also really strange to be speaking into a camera and hearing nothing back. So it's been really, really great to have all of you on this call. And please go on to the expo, check out their solutions, contact them privately here, talk to each other, connect, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes on the main stage. Thank you all so much.